There comes a quiet moment, often after 70, when you look around your life, not with judgment, not with panic, but with stillness, and ask yourself, why don't I feel as happy as I thought I would by now? You've done so much. You've raised children, loved deeply, lost things that mattered. You've built routines, let go of others. And still, sometimes there's a heaviness, a feeling that joy is further away than it should be. Helen, 74, sat on her porch one evening with a warm cup of tea in her hands. The sky was turning that soft lavender shade that only appears right before the stars come out. Her dog was asleep at her feet. There was no noise, no ruse, no conflict. And yet, inside, she felt unsettled. Not sad exactly, just dulled, as if a blanket of quiet restlessness had settled over her shoulders and wouldn't lift. She couldn't figure out why. Nothing was wrong, but nothing felt entirely right either. That's when she heard a quote in a podcast that made her stop mid-sip. Happiness, after a certain age, isn't about what you chase. It's about what you choose to release. Those words sank in deep, because the truth is, after 70, happiness isn't about achieving more. It's about carrying less. We often think we need to add things to feel better. New routines, new hobbies, new supplements. But what if the secret to greater joy was in subtracting? Not things you can buy, but invisible weights you've been holding onto for years. Beliefs, habits, people, patterns, guilt, regrets, fears. Today, we're going to talk about 8 things you can let go of, starting now, that may be quietly stealing your happiness. Some are obvious once we name them. Others are so deeply woven into daily life, we don't even notice how heavy they become. But one by one, we'll explore them together. And you might find that just removing one opens a little more space in your heart, your day, and your peace. Let's start with the first. It's the most subtle and the most dangerous. The quiet belief that your best days are behind you. Helen kept coming back to that feeling. It wasn't a loud sadness. It was something gentler, but more persistent, like a whisper in the back of her mind. A quiet suggestion that maybe the bright, exciting, joy-filled days were gone. She remembered being younger and thinking of retirement as freedom. She thought there would be dancing, travel, mornings that started slowly, and evenings full of laughter. But now that she was actually here, in the season she dreamed of, it felt smaller. She looked around and thought, is this it? That's when she realized the problem wasn't her life. It was the story she had started telling herself. This is one of the heaviest things so many people carry after 70. The belief that their best days are behind them. It doesn't always sound dramatic. Sometimes it's hidden in little phrases like, I'm too old for that now. Those days are long gone. That part of life was for then, not now. And without realizing it, we start making our world smaller. We say no more often. We stop trying new things. We talk about the past more than we dream about the future. And we quietly start to expect less joy because we believe that the big joys already came and went. But what if that belief is just wrong? What if your best moments aren't about years or energy or opportunity? What if they're about perspective? Because here's the truth. Some of the richest, most meaningful, and deeply peaceful moments in life happen after 70. Not because things are faster, but because they're clearer. Not because you have more, but because you finally know what matters. That meal you shared with your daughter last week, that quiet morning when you sat with coffee and didn't check the time, that phone call with an old friend that lasted an hour, these are not leftovers from a fuller life. These are life. And when you stop looking back with the idea that nothing will ever feel that good again, you make space for the joy of now. Helen started doing something simple. Every morning, before checking the news or her phone, she asked herself, what small thing might make today feel good? Not big, not bold, just good. Some days it was sitting on the porch with a blanket and her favorite music. Other days it was texting someone first just to say hi, or cooking something new, even if it didn't turn out perfect. And with each small act, that whisper, your best days are behind you, got quieter. Because the truth is, joy doesn't retire. It just waits for you to believe in it again. And once you let go of that belief, You start to see beauty where you stopped looking. Now let's talk about another invisible weight, one that pretends to protect us, but actually keeps us isolated and guarded. Let's talk about resentment and what happens when you finally let it go. Joan hadn't spoken to her sister in 8 years. Not since that awful argument over their parents' estate. Not since the cold words, the slammed door, and the long silence that followed. Whenever someone brought up her sister's name, Joan would shrug and say, "It's better this way." And maybe she believed it. Or maybe it was easier to say that than admit how much it still hurt. Because deep down, something in her tightened every time she thought about it. A weight, a bitterness, a dull ache she couldn't quite explain. And the thing is, she wasn't angry anymore. Not exactly. She was tired. But that's the strange thing about resentment. It doesn't always feel like rage. Sometimes it feels like fatigue, like tension, like something quietly stealing your peace without ever raising its voice. You don't even realize it's there until one day you do. Joan found herself sitting alone in her kitchen one evening, staring at an old photo tucked in a drawer. It was a picture of her and her sister at a lake from years ago, both laughing, squinting at the sun, arms around each other like nothing could break them. She looked at that photo for a long time, and for the first time in years, she didn't feel stubborn. She felt sad, and that sadness told her the truth. She hadn't let go. She had just buried the pain deep enough to function. Resentment is heavy like that. It builds walls. It hardens soft places. It convinces us that holding on is strength, when in reality, it's the weight that keeps us from rising. We carry it because we think it protects us, but all it does is keep us tired. Here's the truth. Forgiveness isn't about saying what happened was okay. It's about saying you're okay now, even if they never apologize, never change, never return. It's not about reconciliation. It's about reclaiming the parts of yourself that were trapped in that pain. Joan didn't call her sister that night. She didn't write a letter. She just sat with that photo and whispered, "I'm done carrying this." And something in her shifted. It wasn't dramatic, but the next morning, she felt a little lighter. She played music while making breakfast. She smiled more when she talked to the mailman, and she noticed that her laugh came out easier. Because sometimes happiness doesn't arrive as a big new beginning. Sometimes it returns when you clear the space for it, by letting go of what no longer needs to be held. That's the quiet power of release. Now, let's turn to something even more common. Something that creeps into our daily thoughts without us noticing. The habit of comparing your life to someone else's and the silent damage it leaves behind. Bill didn't think of himself as jealous. He had his home, his health, enough savings to get by. But every time he opened the Christmas cards his old friends still sent, something in him twisted. Tom and Susan had gone on another cruise, celebrating 50 years of adventure. The caption said, with 2 tan faces smiling in front of a beach he couldn't name. Don's daughter had opened her own law firm. Their grandkids were already applying to Ivy League schools. And Bill? He'd spent most of the year fixing the kitchen faucet, arguing with insurance paperwork, and wondering how his knees had aged 10 years and 6 months. He didn't resent them. Not really. But after he looked at those pictures, his life seemed dimmer by comparison. Like whatever joy he might have felt that morning had been quietly pushed aside by someone else's success. That's how comparison works. It doesn't shout. It whispers, "You're behind. You're less. You didn't do it right." And the longer we entertain those whispers, the heavier they become. After 70, this can become especially toxic because we live in a world that loves to measure achievement, youth, status, energy. And when we're no longer chasing titles or milestones, it's easy to feel like we've lost the game altogether. But here's the truth. Your life is not behind. Your joy is not on someone else's timeline, and your story was never supposed to match theirs. When you compare your life to someone else's highlight reel, especially the curated version they send in holiday cards or post online, you're comparing your full, complicated, beautiful human story to someone else's top 5 moments. And that's not fair. What you don't see in that photo is the health scare that happened 2 months later, the money stress, the silence in the evenings when the laughter fades. You see the light, not the cost. Bill realized this one day while walking through the park. He saw a couple sitting on a bench, laughing over sandwiches. And something clicked. He didn't know their story. He didn't know what they'd lost, what they were surviving, what they were praying for. But they looked happy in that moment. And he had those moments too. They just didn't come with a postcard. So he stopped reading the cards with envy. He started reading them with curiosity, then with compassion, and eventually with gratitude for what others had and for what he had too. Because happiness doesn't grow in the garden of comparison. It grows in presence, in noticing what is instead of mourning what isn't. Letting go of comparison is like removing a filter from your eyes. Suddenly, your own life looks brighter again. Not because it changed, but because now you're seeing it for itself, not in the shadow of someone else's. And that is where joy begins to return. Now let's shift to something even more personal, something that lives not in the mind, but in the body. It's the clutter, the extra, the things we no longer use, and how clearing them out can clear something inside us too. Marianne had lived in the same house for 42 years. Every hallway, every drawer, every closet held something with a story. There were baby clothes from when her son was born. He was 45 now. There were 5 broken lamps in the garage she always meant to fix. There were letters from friends she hadn't spoken to in decades, books she hadn't opened since the 80s, and Tupperware containers with no lids, but too many memories to toss. She told herself it all mattered, and in some ways it did. But lately, walking through her own home had started to feel heavy. She didn't see warmth anymore. She saw weight. The clutter wasn't just on the shelves, it was pressing on her shoulders, one forgotten item at a time. This is one of the most overlooked causes of quiet unhappiness after 70, being surrounded by too much of what no longer serves you. It's not just about minimalism, it's about emotional load, because every object holds energy. Every "I'll deal with that later" becomes something your brain keeps track of, whether you realize it or not. And over time, all those unfinished decisions, those saved just in case items, those relics of past seasons, they start to blur the present. The result? You move slower. You avoid certain rooms. You feel less in control of your own space. And here's what really hurts. Many people think letting go of these things means letting go of the people or memories attached to them. But that's not true. You're not erasing history. You're making room for the next chapter of it. Marianne started small, just one drawer in the kitchen, then one shelf in the bedroom. She gave herself permission to keep what still sparked something real, and to thank and release the rest. She didn't rush. She didn't follow a checklist. She just listened to how each thing made her feel. And if it felt like an anchor instead of spark, she let it go. Little by little, her home changed. And more than that, she changed. There was light again, not just through the windows, but in her face. She moved easier, breathed deeper, slept better, because clearing space in your home often clears space in your heart too. And sometimes, happiness doesn't arrive as something new. It emerges when you finally let go of what's been standing in its way. Next, we'll talk about a weight that isn't in the attic or basement. It's something we carry in our posture, our language, our silence. The idea that we no longer matter, that we've become invisible. Let's talk about how letting go of that lie can change everything. Ever since Robert turned 72, he started noticing a strange shift. People interrupted him more. Waiters looked to his daughter when asking for the order. His doctor started speaking faster, explaining less. And at the grocery store, no one seemed to make eye contact anymore. It wasn't rude. Not exactly. It was something quieter, subtler, like the world had decided to blur his edges just enough to make him fade into the background. At first, he told himself it was just his imagination. Then one day, during a family dinner, he started to share a story, something funny that had happened during his morning walk. But halfway through, someone changed the subject, and no one came back to his story. That night, Robert lay awake thinking, have I stopped mattering? It's one of the most painful feelings we can carry with us, the sense that we've become invisible. It doesn't happen all at once. It builds over time, in the little moments where we feel overlooked, unheard, or quietly dismissed. And the most dangerous part? Eventually, we start believing it. We talk less, shrink ourselves, stop offering ideas. And we tell ourselves, maybe I should stay quiet. Maybe they don't need me like before. But the truth is, that belief is a lie. You have not lost your value. You have not expired. And you have every right to be seen, heard, and included. What often needs to be released is the quiet agreement we make with silence. The moment we decide to stop raising our hand, to stop offering our story, to stop reminding the world that we still have things to say. Letting go of that agreement is one of the most powerful things you can do for your happiness. Robert decided to change one thing. At the next family gathering, instead of waiting to be invited into the conversation, he claimed his space. He told a story from his childhood, spoke slowly, clearly, and when someone tried to change the subject, he smiled and gently said, "Let me finish. This part's important." And they listened, not because he forced it, but because he stepped back into his place. Since then, he started sending weekly texts to his grandchildren, short stories, quotes, even little jokes. He joined a local discussion group at the library. He started remembering that his presence matters. Because it does. You're not a background character in someone else's story. You're still writing your own. And your words, your experiences, your wisdom, they belong in the room. Happiness grows when we give ourselves permission to take up space again, to be visible, to be part of the conversation. And sometimes that starts with a single sentence. I'm still here, and I still have something to say. Now let's move to another silent burden. One we often carry with good intentions, but that slowly chips away at our peace. The need to keep everyone else comfortable, even at the cost of our own boundaries. Eleanor always said yes. She said yes when her neighbor asked for a ride. Again. She said yes when her niece wanted to host a birthday party at her house. She said yes when the church group needed volunteers, even though her knees were aching that week. And every time she said yes, she told herself it was the right thing to do. That helping made her useful. That saying no would be selfish. But lately, Eleanor had started to feel something else. Not resentment exactly, but a kind of quiet exhaustion. She felt stretched, worn, like her days no longer belonged to her. She was busy but not fulfilled. And when she finally had a moment to herself, she realized something hard. She hadn't asked herself what she wanted in a very long time. This is the hidden cost of always being the reliable one. When you've spent most of your life caring for others, children, parents, spouses, neighbors, it's easy to confuse being helpful with being worthy. But at some point, the need to be useful becomes a fear of not being needed. And that fear makes us say yes, even when our body, our energy, our soul is quietly begging for rest. The truth is, you don't have to earn your place in this world by overextending yourself. Not anymore. Your worth isn't tied to how often you say yes. Your value doesn't increase when you suffer in silence. Eleanor decided to try something different. The next time her neighbor asked for a ride, she paused. And instead of a quick yes, she said, "I'd love to help, but I need some rest today." She said it gently, kindly, but she meant it. And what surprised her most, the world didn't collapse. Her neighbor found another ride. Her niece booked a restaurant. And Eleanor, she stayed home, put on her favorite music, and sat on the porch with a book she'd been meaning to read for years. And for the first time in a long while, she felt at peace. Because when you stop trying to hold everything together for everyone else, you give yourself permission to finally breathe. Letting go of the need to please doesn't make you selfish. It makes you honest. It makes you whole. And happiness has a way of returning the moment you stop asking permission to care for yourself. Now let's talk about one last thing, a weight that's so subtle it hides inside how we talk about our bodies, our age, even our reflection in the mirror. It's the habit of criticizing yourself, and how letting go of that one pattern can soften everything. Linda stood in front of the mirror one morning and sighed. She didn't say it out loud, but the thought was automatic. I look tired, old, heavy, faded. She brushed her hair, pulled on a sweater, and moved on with her day. But that quiet criticism stayed with her. It followed her into the kitchen, into the grocery store, into every small decision. It shaped how she moved, how she smiled, how she showed up in the world. And the worst part? She'd been doing it for years, so long, it didn't even feel like cruelty anymore. It just felt like truth. That's the hidden danger of self-criticism. It doesn't scream, it echoes. And over time, it becomes the background noise of your life. It shows up when you catch your reflection and frown, when you talk about yourself with a laugh but a sting underneath, when you downplay your accomplishments, apologize for your wrinkles, call yourself slow, useless, too old to matter. And each time you say it, even in jest, your nervous system hears it. Your heart hears it. Your joy hears it. But here's the thing. You were never meant to carry that voice. That voice, it came from somewhere. Maybe from a parent who never praised you, a culture obsessed with youth, or years of feeling invisible. But it doesn't belong to you anymore. What have you let go? Not because you suddenly see yourself as flawless, but because you finally choose to treat yourself like someone worth being kind to. Linda tried something different that day. Instead of criticizing her reflection, she paused and whispered, "You've made it through so much. I'm proud of you." It felt strange at first, then it felt true. She didn't become a different woman overnight, but something inside her softened. She began to notice what she liked about her face, the spark in her eyes, the kindness in her mouth. She started choosing clothes that made her feel alive, not just hidden. And little by little, the voice that once criticized her began to quiet down. That's the final burden to let go of. The belief that you must be hard on yourself to be worthy. You don't. You're allowed to speak to yourself gently, to admire your reflection, to move through the world without apology. And when you do, you give happiness a place to return to. Because joy does not live in perfection. It lives in acceptance. Let's take a moment to remember the 8 things we've just uncovered. Each one a stone in your pocket. Each one something you no longer need to carry. Letting go of the belief that your best days are behind you. Releasing the grip of resentment. Stepping out of comparison. Clearing the weight of too many things. Reclaiming your voice and your value. Saying no when your soul needs rest. Choosing to stop pleasing and start living. And speaking to yourself with kindness, not criticism. Happiness doesn't require a perfect life. It simply needs space. And after 70, you've earned the right to make room for it. Fully, freely, and without guilt. So here's your invitation. Choose one thing to release this week. Just one. Watch what shifts when you do. And if this video stirred something in you, share it. Tell us in the comments. What are you letting go of? What weight are you ready to put down? And if this message brought you comfort, give the video a like, subscribe to the channel, and join us for more reflections, more relief, and more joy, one day at a time. Thank you for being here. You are seen. You are enough. And we'll see you in the next one.